The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, just as I was leaving work. My brother Mark's name flashed on my phone, and I almost didn't answer. We weren't close, hadn't been for years. But something made me pick up. "Claire," he said, his voice strained. "It's Mom. She had a fall. She's in the hospital." I felt the world tilt. Mom was 78, still sharp, still independent, still living in the house we'd grown up in. A fall could mean anything. "I'm on my way," I said. By the time I reached the hospital, Mark had already made decisions. Decisions I hadn't been consulted on. Decisions that would change everything. Let me rewind. I'm Claire, the younger daughter in a family of 4. My brother Mark is 5 years older. Growing up, we were close enough, squabbled like normal siblings but loved each other. After college, we drifted apart. He went into finance, married young, had kids, built a life in the suburbs. I stayed single, focused on my career as a social worker, lived in the city. We saw each other at holidays, exchanged polite small talk, and that was it. Mom was the center of our family. Widowed young, she'd raised us alone, working 2 jobs, sacrificing everything to give us opportunities she never had. She was proud, independent, fiercely capable. Even in her 70s, she drove herself to appointments, managed her own finances, kept the house immaculate. I checked in on her weekly, but she never needed much. "I'm fine, sweetheart," she'd say. "You focus on your own life." Mark was closer geographically, only 20 minutes away, but he visited less often. His wife, Linda, never really got along with Mom. Too much history, too many small slights accumulated over the years. So Mom and I became each other's confidants, our bond deepening as the years passed. The fall changed everything. I arrived at the hospital to find Mark already in the waiting room, his face grim. "She broke her hip," he said. "Surgery went well. But, Claire, she's not herself. Confused. Disoriented. The doctors think it might be more than just the anesthesia." I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. "What do you mean?" "They want to run tests. Cognitive tests. They're worried about dementia." Dementia. The word hung in the air between us, heavy and terrifying. Over the next few weeks, the diagnosis became clear. Vascular dementia, likely triggered or accelerated by the trauma of the fall. Mom's mind, once so sharp, was slipping. She'd forget conversations, mix up names, stare at familiar faces with confusion. It was heartbreaking and terrifying in equal measure. Mark took charge immediately. He always did, it was his nature. While I was still reeling, still processing, still hoping it was temporary, he was making plans. "She can't go home alone," he said. "It's not safe. We need to find a facility." "A facility?" "Mark, she just had surgery. She needs time to recover. Maybe she'll get better." "The doctors said the dementia is progressive." "It's not going to get better, Claire. It's going to get worse. We need to be realistic." I hated that word. Realistic. As if accepting the worst was the only mature response. Mark found a place within 2 weeks. Sunrise Meadows, he called it. Affordable, close to me, good reviews. I drove out to see it. The facility was clean enough, but depressing, sterile hallways, underpaid staff, residents staring at televisions in common rooms. It felt like a warehouse, not a home. "Mark, this place is awful. Mom deserves better." "Better costs money, Claire. Money we don't have. Her savings aren't infinite, and Medicare doesn't cover this kind of care forever. We have to be practical." Practical. Another word I was learning to hate. I researched other options. In-home care, assisted living communities with better reputations, programs that might help her stay independent longer. Each option was more expensive than the last. Each one was met with Mark's resistance. "We can't afford it, Claire. I've run the numbers. Her savings will only last a few years at this rate. We have to think about the long term." "But it's her money. Her savings. Shouldn't she get to decide how it's spent?" "She can't decide anything anymore. That's the point." He was right legally. Mom had been declared incompetent to make financial decisions. Mark had petitioned for guardianship, and I'd agreed, reluctantly, because someone needed to manage her affairs. But I didn't realize until too late that guardianship meant Mark controlled everything. Her bank accounts, her investments, her house. All of it. I visited Mom every week at Sunrise Meadows. Each visit broke my heart a little more. She'd lost weight. Her eyes were hollow. She'd ask about the garden, about her friends, about going home. I'd hold her hand and lie, telling her she'd be home soon. She doesn't belong here, I told Mark. This place is making her worse. She's getting the care she needs. You're just emotional. I was emotional. I was also right. But right doesn't matter when you don't have power. 6 months after Mom entered Sunrise Meadows, I got a call from a family friend. Claire, I hate to tell you this, but I saw Mark at an open house last week. He was looking at a vacation property. A cabin on the lake. Paid cash, the realtor said. I felt my blood run cold. A vacation property? With what money? I don't know, but it was expensive. 6 figures easy. I started digging. Quietly, carefully, without telling anyone. I requested account statements from Mom's bank. I reviewed the guardianship filings. I compared the numbers. The picture that emerged was devastating. Mark had been systematically transferring Mom's assets into accounts I didn't know existed. He'd sold her house, without telling me, and deposited the proceeds into a joint account in his name only. He'd liquidated her investments, her savings, everything. And he'd used the money to buy himself a cabin, a new car, and God knows what else. I confronted him at his office. He didn't even try to deny it. It's not theft, Claire. It's inheritance. She would have wanted me to have it. She's still alive, Mark. She needs that money for her care. You've stolen from our mother. I've protected our family's assets. The nursing home would have taken everything anyway. At least this way, something stays in the family. I stared at him, seeing a stranger. This wasn't my brother. This was a predator, wearing my brother's face. I'm going to report you, I said. I'm going to the police, to Adult Protective Services, to everyone who will listen. Mark laughed. Go ahead. I have power of attorney. I have guardianship. Everything I did was legal. You don't have a leg to stand on. He was right. On paper, everything he'd done was technically within his rights as guardian. The system, designed to protect vulnerable adults, had become his weapon. I went home that night and cried until I couldn't cry anymore. Then I started researching. I needed something, anything, that could prove Mark wasn't fit to be guardian. Something that would give me standing to challenge him in court. Weeks passed. I hired a lawyer, a woman named Priya, who specialized in elder law. She reviewed the documents, shook her head, and told me the truth. Without evidence of wrongdoing, without proof that Mark had acted against Mom's interests, my case was weak. Then, on a Sunday afternoon, I was cleaning out Mom's house, the house Mark had sold, that was about to be emptied and turned over to new owners. I found a box in the back of her closet, filled with old papers. Birth certificates, marriage licenses, tax returns from decades ago. And at the bottom, a yellowed envelope with a date stamped on it. 1995. Inside was a doctor's note, handwritten on letterhead from a clinic that no longer existed. It detailed a medical evaluation of my brother Mark, age 25, after a serious car accident. The diagnosis, traumatic brain injury, resulting in impaired judgment, impulsivity, and difficulty with complex decision-making. The recommendation: patients should not be entrusted with financial responsibilities or legal decision-making authority without close supervision. I stared at the document, my heart pounding. This was it. Proof that Mark had a history of cognitive impairment that might disqualify him from serving as guardian. Proof that Mom, in her wisdom, had kept it hidden all these years. So, what happens next? Does this document give me the leverage I need? And what will Mark do when he finds out I have it? Let me know your theories in the comments. Part 2 is where the legal battle begins.
Subscribe.
I sat on the floor of my mother's empty house, the yellow doctor's note trembling in my hands. 1995. 28 years ago. Mark would have been 25, just starting his career in finance. I remembered the car accident vaguely because I was only 20 at the time, away at college. Mom had told me he was fine, just banged up. She never mentioned a brain injury. Never mentioned impaired judgment or financial decision-making. She protected him, as she always did. And now, decades later, that protection might be the key to saving her from him. I called Priya immediately. She listened as I read the note aloud, then was quiet for a long moment. Claire, if this document is authentic, it changes everything. A documented brain injury, with specific recommendations about financial decision-making, that's exactly the kind of evidence we need to challenge his guardianship. But we have to verify it. The clinic closed years ago. The doctor who wrote it, Dr. Helen Marsh, she'd be in her 80s now, if she's still alive. Then we find her. Priya started digging. I started digging. We contacted medical boards, retirement communities, alumni associations. For weeks, we hit dead ends. Dr. Marsh had vanished from public records after retiring in the early 2000s. Meanwhile, Mom's condition was deteriorating. Sunrise Meadows, the cheap facility Mark had chosen, was understaffed and overburdened. She'd developed bed sores. She'd lost more weight. When I visited, she barely recognized me. "Who are you?" she'd ask, her eyes confused and frightened. "Where's my daughter?" I'd hold her hand and tell her I was right there, but the words didn't penetrate. Mark, meanwhile, was living large. I saw photos on social media, him and Linda at their new cabin on a boat, at expensive restaurants. He tagged the cabin's location, a picturesque lake 3 hours north. The comments were full of friends congratulating him on his smart investments. The injustice of it burned inside me. He was spending our mother's life savings on luxury, while she lay in a substandard facility, neglected and forgotten. Then a breakthrough. Priya found a former nurse who'd worked at the clinic in the 1990s. She remembered Dr. Marsh, remembered the accident, remembered Mark. Young man, very charming, but something off about him, she said. The doctor was concerned. Wrote a strong recommendation that he not be given financial responsibility. She said it to his face, too. He didn't take it well. "Do you know where Dr. Marsh is now?" "She moved to Oregon years ago. To be near her daughter, I think. I don't have an address, but I know the daughter's name. Sarah Marsh. She's a teacher somewhere in Portland." I spent the next week tracking Sarah Marsh. She had a common name, but with enough digging, I found her a high school English teacher in a Portland suburb. I wrote her a long email, explaining who I was, what was happening, why I needed to find her mother. 3 days later, she replied, "Claire, my mother is 84 now, living in an assisted living facility herself. Her memory isn't what it used to be, but she still has moments of clarity." I showed her your email. "She remembers your brother. She remembers the case. She said she'd be willing to talk to you if you think it would help." She also said something I didn't understand. "Tell her to check the clinic's old records. They might still exist." I don't know what that means, but I'm passing it along. Sarah. The clinic's old records. The clinic had closed, but where did records go when a medical practice shut down? I called the state medical board, the county health department, anyone who might know. Finally, I got a lead. Many of the clinic's records had been transferred to a storage facility when it closed, then eventually to a university medical archives. 3 weeks and countless phone calls later, I was sitting in a dusty archive room at a university 3 hours away, flipping through boxes of old patient files. And there, in a folder labeled Vance, Mark, was the complete medical record from 1995. Not just the doctor's note, the full neuropsychological evaluation, the imaging reports, the follow-up assessments. All of it confirming what Dr. Marsh had written: traumatic brain injury, impaired judgment, and a clear recommendation against financial responsibility. I copied everything. I sent it to Priya. And then I waited. Priya filed a motion to remove Mark as guardian the next week. The evidence was overwhelming. A documented brain injury, a pattern of financial mismanagement, and now, proof that he'd been systematically looting Mom's assets. The court scheduled a hearing for 6 weeks out. Mark was furious. He called me, screaming, threatening. "You're destroying this family. Mom would be ashamed of you. Mom would be ashamed of you, Mark." You stole from her. You put her in a facility that's slowly killing her. I'm just trying to fix what you broke." He hung up. The hearing date loomed. In the weeks that followed, I visited Mom as often as I could. She was fading, but sometimes, in brief moments of clarity, she'd look at me with recognition. "Claire," she'd whisper. "I'm scared." "I know, Mom. I'm going to get you out of here. I promise." I didn't know if I could keep that promise, but I was going to try. So, what happens at the hearing? Does the judge rule in my favor? And what does Mark do when he realizes he's about to lose everything? Let me know your predictions in the comments.
Part 3 is the courtroom showdown. Subscribe.
The courtroom was small and impersonal, the kind of place where families come to tear each other apart in front of strangers. Mark sat at the respondent's table with his lawyer, a slick, expensive man who'd probably cost more than Mom's entire monthly Social Security check. I sat with Priya, my hands clasped in my lap, my heart pounding. Mom wasn't there. She was back at Sunrise Meadows, confused and alone, unaware that her children were fighting over her future. The judge, a woman named Morrison with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, called the court to order. "This is a motion to remove Mark Vance as guardian of his mother, Eleanor Vance." Priya stood and delivered our opening statement with quiet confidence. "Your Honor, this case is about betrayal." The respondent, Mark Vance, was entrusted with the care and financial management of his mother, Eleanor Vance. Instead of protecting her, he systematically looted her assets, placed her in a substandard facility, and used her life savings to fund his own lifestyle. We have evidence, bank records, property transfers, and most importantly, medical documentation from 1995 showing that Mr. Vance has a traumatic brain injury that impairs his judgment and makes him unfit for financial responsibility. Mark's lawyer, a man named Harrison, stood to object. "Your Honor, this is a desperate attempt to rewrite history. My client has served as guardian for 2 years, acting in good faith at all times. The 1995 document is irrelevant. It's nearly 30 years old, and my client has functioned successfully as a financial professional for decades." Judge Morrison held up a hand. "I'll hear the evidence. Proceed." Priya called her first witness, me. I walked to the stand, my legs unsteady. Under Priya's gentle questioning, I described the last 2 years. The fall, the diagnosis, Mark's sudden takeover. The discovery of the cabin, the car, the missing funds. The deterioration of Mom's health at Sunrise Meadows. The moment I found the 1995 doctor's note in her closet. "When you found that document, what did you think?"
Priya asked.
I thought maybe Mom had kept it for a reason. Maybe she always knew Mark couldn't be trusted with money. Maybe she was protecting us even then." Harrison cross-examined aggressively, trying to paint me as a bitter sister jealous of her brother's success. "Isn't it true, Ms. Vance, that you've always resented your brother's financial success?"
"No."
"Isn't it true that you never visited your mother as often as he did?" "I visited her every week. He visited once a month, if that." "And yet you claim to be the one who truly cares about her well-being?" I met his eyes. "I don't claim it. I prove it. Every week I was there. Every week I held her hand. Every week I watched her fade in a facility he chose. Where was he? At his cabin. On his boat. Spending her money." Harrison had no further questions. The next witness was Dr. Helen Marsh, via video link from her assisted living facility in Oregon. She was frail, her voice soft, but her mind was sharp. She described evaluating Mark in 1995 after his car accident. She described the tests, the scans, the diagnosis. And she described her recommendation. I wrote that he should not be entrusted with financial decisions. The brain injury affected his judgment in ways that might not be obvious in daily life, but would become apparent in complex situations. He could appear normal, even charming, but his decision-making was impaired. I was very clear about that in my report. Harrison tried to discredit her, pointing out her age, her own residence in a facility, the decades that had passed. But Dr. Marsh held firm. I remember that case clearly. It was unusual, A young man with such a promising future, but with a hidden vulnerability. I worried about him for years afterward. I'm not surprised to hear he's in trouble. The final witness was a forensic accountant Priya had hired. She walked the court through the paper trail. The sale of Mom's house, the transfers to joint accounts, the purchase of the cabin, the car, the luxury vacations. Total misappropriated funds, nearly $400,000. Your Honor, Priya concluded, this is not a misunderstanding. This is theft. And the man who committed it was never fit to be guardian in the first place. Mark's lawyer made his best argument, that the transfers were within Mark's rights as guardian, that the cabin was an investment, that the 1995 document was too old to be relevant. But the evidence was overwhelming. Judge Morrison took a recess to consider her ruling. I sat in the hallway, my stomach churning, while Mark paced on the other side, refusing to look at me. An hour later, we were called back in. Judge Morrison's face was grave. I have reviewed the evidence carefully. The 1995 medical records are compelling and, I find, admissible. They establish that Mr. Vance has a documented brain injury that impairs his judgment, specifically in financial matters. The subsequent pattern of behavior, the asset transfers, the personal purchases, the choice of a substandard facility for his mother, confirms that this impairment has had real-world consequences. Mark's face went pale. Therefore, I am granting the motion to remove Mark Vance as guardian. All assets under his control are to be frozen immediately pending a full accounting. I am appointing Claire Vance as temporary guardian, with a full hearing to follow in 60 days to determine permanent arrangements. The gavel banged. Mark's lawyer was already on his feet, filing an appeal. But for now, I had won. I left the courthouse in a daze. I had guardianship. I had control of Mom's assets. But Mark still had the money he'd already taken, the cabin, the car, the cash he'd stashed. And he was appealing, which meant this wasn't over. The first thing I did was move Mom. I found a beautiful facility, small, personal, with gardens and caring staff. It cost more, but with the assets Mark hadn't yet drained, we could afford it for now. The day I moved her, she looked around with something like recognition. "This is nice," she whispered. "Can I stay here?" "You can stay here, Mom. I promise." She squeezed my hand. It was the first time in months she'd seemed present. But the battle wasn't over. Mark's appeal was scheduled for 6 months out, and I still had to find a way to recover the money he'd stolen. So, what happens next? Can I get the money back? And what will Mark do when he realizes he's lost everything? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Part 4 is the fight for restitution.
Subscribe.
The appeal gave Mark 6 more months of freedom, but it didn't stop me from pursuing the money. With my new status as temporary guardian, I had legal standing to demand an accounting of every dollar he'd taken. His lawyer fought every request, delayed every hearing, buried us in paperwork. But Priya was relentless. She subpoenaed bank records, credit card statements, property deeds. Piece by piece, we built a map of Mark's theft. The cabin, the car, the vacations, the mysterious cash withdrawals, all of it traced back to Mom's accounts. By the time the appeal hearing arrived, we had a complete picture. The appeal hearing was held in the same courtroom, before the same judge. Mark sat at the respondent's table, looking thinner, more haggard than before. His lawyer, Harrison, argued that the 1995 medical records were inadmissible, that Mark had acted in good faith, that the asset transfers were legitimate investments. But the evidence told a different story. Priya presented our findings methodically. The cabin, purchased for $285,000 cash, money traced directly from the sale of Mom's house. The luxury SUV, $65,000, paid for with a transfer from Mom's investment account. The vacations to Costa Rica, to Europe, to Hawaii, all charged to credit cards that Mark had opened in Mom's name. The cash withdrawals, totaling over $50,000, with no documentation of what they'd been used for. Your Honor, Priya concluded, this is not a misunderstanding. This is not poor judgment. This is theft, pure and simple. And the man who committed it was never fit to be guardian in the first place. Mark's lawyer made one last attempt. My client made mistakes, yes. But he believed he was acting in his mother's best interests. The cabin, for example, he intended it as a family retreat, a place where his mother could eventually come to recover. I couldn't stay silent. She can barely walk. She has dementia. She'll never see that cabin. Judge Morrison held up a hand. Ms. Vance, please. I'll hear from you when it's appropriate. But the damage was done. The image of Mark's family retreat crumbled against the reality of Mom's condition. The judge took 2 days to deliberate. When she finally issued her ruling, it was devastating for Mark. The appeal is denied. The removal of Mark Vance as guardian stands. Furthermore, I am ordering full restitution of all misappropriated funds. Mr. Vance is to liquidate the cabin, the vehicle, and any other assets purchased with his mother's money and return the proceeds to her estate within 90 days. Failure to comply will result in contempt of court and potential criminal charges. Mark's face went white. His lawyer immediately began talking about another appeal, but Judge Morrison cut him off. Enough, Mr. Harrison. Your client has had his day in court. The ruling stands. I sat in the gallery, tears streaming down my face. Not from joy, from exhaustion, from relief, from the overwhelming weight of finally being heard. But Mark wasn't finished. Over the next 90 days, he fought every step of the way. He claimed he couldn't sell the cabin because the market was down. He claimed the car was a lease, not a purchase. He claimed the cash withdrawals were for Mom's expenses, even though he had no receipts. Priya countered each claim with evidence, filed motions to compel, threatened contempt. In the end, we recovered about 60% of what he'd taken. The rest was gone, spent, hidden, or simply impossible to trace. But it was enough. Enough to move Mom to a better facility. Enough to ensure she'd be cared for, whatever the future held. Mom settled into her new home slowly. At first, she was confused, disoriented by the change. But the staff were patient, kind, attentive. They learned her preferences, her routines, her stories. They called me with updates, sent photos, invited me to family events. For the first time in years, I felt like Mom was in good hands. Mark, meanwhile, faded from our lives. He sold the cabin, returned what he could, and moved to another state with Linda. I heard through relatives that he'd started a new business, that it was struggling, that he was drinking more. I didn't reach out. I couldn't. The wound was too deep. Then, 6 months after the ruling, I got a letter. Handwritten, on plain paper from Mark. I almost threw it away. But something made me open it. Claire, I know you'll never forgive me. I know I don't deserve it. But I need you to know that I'm sorry. Not for getting caught, for everything. For what I did to Mom, to you, to our family. I've spent a lot of time thinking about who I've become, and I don't like what I see. I'm getting help. Therapy, finally. I'm learning about the brain injury, about how it's affected my judgment, about why I made the choices I did. It's not an excuse, I know that. But it's an explanation. And maybe, someday, it can be a path to something better. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know. Mark. So, what do I do with this letter?
Do you respond?
Do I ignore it? And what does it mean for our family, for Mom, for the future? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. The final part is about forgiveness, closure, and the long road ahead.
Subscribe.
I kept Mark's letter in my nightstand drawer for 3 months. I'd take it out sometimes, read it again, try to feel something other than the cold, familiar anger. But the anger was all I had left. It had protected me, fueled me, kept me going through the darkest days. Letting it go felt like letting go of a part of myself. Then on a Sunday afternoon, I visited Mom. She was having a good day, alert, engaged, almost like her old self. She asked about Mark. How's your brother? I haven't seen him in so long.
I didn't know what to say.
So I told her the truth. I sat beside Mom's bed, holding her hand, and I told her everything. The fall, the facility, the theft. The court case, the documents, the restitution. Mark's letter, his apology, his struggle. She listened quietly, her eyes fixed on my face, absorbing each word. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice soft but clear. I always worried about him, you know. After the accident. He seemed fine, but I could tell something was different. The way he made decisions, the way he looked at money. I kept that doctor's note all these years because I was afraid. Afraid that someday, something like this would happen. Why didn't you tell me?
She squeezed my hand.
Because he was your brother. Because I hoped it would never matter. Because I thought love could fix anything. She paused, her eyes distant. I was wrong. We sat together in silence, the weight of decades settling between us. Claire, I need you to do something for me. Anything, Mom. I need you to forgive him. Not for him, for you. The anger you're carrying, it's too heavy. It will crush you if you let it. Mom, he stole from you. He put you in that awful place. I know what he did. But I also know who he was before the accident. The little boy who used to bring me breakfast in bed. The teenager who cried when his dog died. That boy is still in there somewhere, buried under all the damage. I want you to find him. Not for his sake, for yours. I left the facility that day with more questions than answers. Forgiveness. Could I ever truly forgive Mark? And if I did, what would that even look like? I wrote back to him. Not a long letter, just a few lines. Mark, I read your letter. I've read it many times. I don't know if I can forgive you, but I'm willing to try. Not because you deserve it, but because Mom asked me to. And because the anger is too heavy to carry forever. I'm glad you're getting help. I hope it works. I hope you find a way to become someone different.
Claire.
I sent it before I could change my mind. Months passed. Mark and I exchanged occasional emails, cautious, tentative, like two people learning to speak again after a long silence. He told me about his therapy, his struggles, his small victories. I told him about Mom, about her good days and bad, about the facility where she was finally thriving. We didn't talk about the past. We didn't talk about the money. We just talked. Mom passed away 2 years later, peacefully, in her sleep. She was surrounded by photos of her children, her grandchildren, her long life. I was holding her hand when she went. Mark arrived an hour later, having driven through the night to be there. He stood in the doorway, his face wet with tears, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel anger when I looked at him. Just sadness. Sadness for what we'd lost, what we'd never get back, what might have been. We buried her in the cemetery where our father lay, under a oak tree she'd loved. Mark spoke first, his voice breaking as he talked about her kindness, her strength, her unwavering love. I spoke after, reading a poem she'd loved, remembering the woman who'd raised us alone, who'd sacrificed everything for her children. After the service, Mark and I stood by the grave, the last 2 people in a dwindling crowd. I'm sorry, he said quietly, for everything. I know. Do you think she forgave me? I thought about it, about her final words to me, about the weight of anger, about the long, hard work of letting go. Yes, I said. I think she did. And I think I'm starting to. He nodded, tears streaming down his face. We stood there together, 2 siblings who'd been through hell and somehow found their way back to each other. The years that followed were not perfect. Mark and I don't talk every week, don't spend holidays together, don't pretend to be the close family we once were. But we talk. We check in. We send birthday cards and Christmas gifts. It's not much, but it's something. I still have the doctor's note from 1995. It's in a frame now, hanging on my wall. Not as a weapon, as a reminder. A reminder that people are complicated, that damage can be hidden, that love and betrayal can coexist in the same heart. A reminder that forgiveness isn't a destination, it's a practice. Something you have to choose, again and again, even when it's hard. The micro-niche here isn't just elder law or guardianship disputes. It's about the long, painful work of family. It's about recognizing that the people we love can hurt us deeply, but that doesn't mean they're monsters. Sometimes they're just broken. Sometimes they're just human. And sometimes, if we're brave enough to keep showing up, we can find our way back to each other. Have you ever had to fight for a parent's care? Have you ever been betrayed by a sibling? How did you find your way through? Share your stories in the comments below. Let's talk about the messy, complicated work of family, forgiveness, and letting go. And if this story of elder care, sibling betrayal, and hard-won redemption resonated with you, share it. Sometimes, the most important stories are the ones about learning to forgive, even when it feels impossible. Thanks for listening.